Hello and welcome to Mad Max number 9. I'll be building this car mostly from parts of this Morris Mini you see before you. If you watch my videos, you know I don't like to dilly-dally around, so let's get started and take this car apart. I'll of course take the car apart by drilling out its two posts. A link to a video on how this is done will be provided. Setting aside the base and the interior plastic for the moment, I want to begin by modifying the metal body. The first modification I wish to make is to remove the hood. The best tool to do this is a jeweler's saw. You can buy these online from sites like Amazon and eBay. The saw uses very small blades that allow for a very small kerf. Kerf is simply the width of the teeth. The smaller the kerf, the less material is removed. And since the blade is so small, you can make much sharper turns than say a hacksaw. The downside to all this is that the blades are very delicate and easy to break. When you use this saw, almost no pressure can be placed on it or you'll snap the blade. If you've never used one, then be sure to buy a lot of blades, as it takes time to get the finesse necessary to use them without breaking them. With the hood out, I'll need to move over to the interior plastic for a moment and using some plastic cutters, nip out the air intake. I'll also cut down the axle holders a little bit off camera. Now when I put the car back together, you can see that I have room for a new engine. The engine I decided to go with is currently installed in this Mustang. I know how Mustang lovers are, so I'll spare them the pain and not show me removing it. Once it's removed, I will need to do a little bit more modifying to get it to fit in this little car. Now that I know that my engine will fit, I'll take the car back apart and proceed to remove the wheels and axles. In this case, I want to keep the original plastic clips on the base, so I will cut the axle between the wheel and the base to preserve them. After they're out, I will start working on building a lifted suspension for this car. I will not be going over the entire process here, as it was the subject for my last video, so I will leave a link to that video if you're interested in learning more about this particular process. The only difference here is that I wanted this car to have a forward rake to it, so I made the back axle assembly larger to push the front of the car down and lift up the back end. This is done for a reason I'll explain later. With the suspension complete, I'll go ahead and spray down the car with paint remover to remove the paint. And then using a dental pick, I'll remove any paint left in the panel lines or other areas where the paint tends to get stuck. Now comes one of the more fun parts of the build. Using a sphere cutter on my Dremel, I'll start plunging the tool into the body of the car. I want to take care not to hit any of the details like the door handles, but try to get as close to them as I can. Besides plunging the tool into the metal, I'll also drag it along the surface. All this will give the car a really beat up, wrinkled look. How far you decide to go with this is completely up to you. For me, I wanted this car to look like it had rolled over a time or two, and someone beat it back into its rough shape with a sledgehammer. Once I was done with the Dremel, I went over the car with some 000 steel wool to complete the look. The steel wool will remove the sharp edges and smooth everything out to give a more realistic look. Now with most of the mechanical work done on the body, I can move to weathering it. I'll start with a simple wash. My favorite is this Nuln Oil by Citadel, but you can make your own wash if you like. I'll drop a link to an old video I have on making your own wash. To use the wash, you simply apply it with a brush. It will find all the low areas in the model and dry there, giving the model a dirty appearance. Once the wash is dried, I can start using weathering powders. I like to use these makeup sponges to apply it. The trick to weathering powders is to use sparingly and to not apply all over. For this car, I'll apply mostly to the edges but steer clear of the flat surfaces. This gives you much needed contrast for a model that is completely made up of similar tones. Once I have the powders where I want them, I'll spray the body with Testors matte clear coat to seal them in. Earlier I had mentioned that I had raised the rear of the car for a reason. That reason is so that I could install a large spare gas tank in the back to support the large engine in the front. Instead of 3D printing the tank, I decided to scratch build it from a small section of aluminum tubing. To give the tubing the shape I desire, I will crush it with a pair of pliers. I'm just going for an oval shape, something that will fit under the rear suspension. Once I have the correct shape and can confirm that it will indeed fit, I'll press the end of the tubing into some copper foil. You can use aluminum if you like. The tube will leave an impression in the foil, making it easy to cut out. After I cut out the two ends, I'll place some super glue on a flat surface. Here I use a leftover piece of wood. And then dab the end of the tubing into the glue. I'll then place the foil on the end and hold it into place while the glue sets up. This usually only takes a minute or so and guarantees that you'll glue your fingers to the tank. After the glue dries, I can tidy up the edges with an emery board. The gas tank will be painted and weathered, so this doesn't need to be perfect. I'm just trying to remove any sharp edges. Before I install a gas tank, I want to rust up the suspension. The easy way to do this is using an airbrush and some rust-colored primer to paint the base minus the wheels. When this dries, I'll spray it with some Testors matte clear coat. The matte clear coat in this case is just to remove the gloss of the primer. While I was at it, I also painted the gas tank in the primer. Once it dries, I'll spray it with Testors matte clear coat and then quickly apply weathering pigments to the tank while the clear coat is still wet. This will help the pigments to stick and will also give the rust that flaky look it gets. Once again, it's important not to cover the entire tank with pigment. I want some of the darker rust primer to show through to give contrast. Once everything dries, I can go about gluing in the tank with some super glue. I do need to be a little bit careful here, as I do not want to cover up the hole in the base that connects to the post of the body. Since I have the base here, I'll go ahead and load up some black acrylic paint into my airbrush to paint the wheels. The best way to do this is by using the air of the airbrush to spin the wheels while applying the paint. If done correctly, the paint goes on very evenly. I will also spray the inside of the body with black paint to cover up any residual blue paint and also to help hide the back post. Since I'm working on the body, I'll go ahead and start putting in some of the smaller details. For the headlights and taillights, I'll be using a red Sharpie marker. Once again, I like using Sharpies as they're transparent, letting the weathering powders and metals show through, giving a more natural look, in my opinion. I chose to go with red headlights as they're very ominous looking, but also to give the model more color. Using a chrome pen, I'll go around the car and paint in small details like the door handles and hinges. I'll also paint in the nitrous canister on the interior plastic, though you really won't be able to see it when the car is put back together. To further emphasize the rust, I'll take some of the bright pigment mixed with a small amount of rubbing alcohol and apply sparingly in a few areas. The alcohol will evaporate quickly and will leave behind the pigment. I'll seal that in with matte clear coat. Since I no longer have a forward post to hold the front of the car together, I'll need to glue the interior plastic to the base. This will keep it from moving around and help keep the car together. Once the glue is set, I'll come back in with a small file to make any final changes to get the engine to fit perfectly. I will then glue the engine in place. I'm only going to use half of the windshield plastic to give the car a back window but not a front. To do this, I'll cut the plastic with some sprue cutters, and then load that into my laser to etch in some cracks. You can also do this with an X-Acto knife if you like. Unlike my previous Mad Max car, I will not put in as many cracks. Now that the engine is in place, I'll go over it with some Nuln Oil wash to give it a greasy, oily appearance. I thought a lot about the stacks. Yes, I could paint them or weather them, but in the end I decided just to leave them their original color. The reason is to give the car character. These cars are based on movie cars. In those films, the cars are themselves characters, with each having a distinct look created by their owners. When working on these cars, just like the real cars, you have to balance realism versus art. Here I chose to go with art to give the car character and to also give the car something that would catch someone's eye. The last step I will take on this engine is to apply a small amount of the rust pigment to the valve covers. Here I want the engine to still have a shiny appearance with just a hint of rust. Next I'm going to make a fuel line from some hemp cord that I can run from the gas tank I made to the engine. The first thing I'll do is paint a small section of the cord with acrylic black paint. After the paint has had time to dry, I will begin gluing it in place with some super glue. I'll use a small pair of tweezers to bend the cord into the positions I want. I want the cord to have a sort of sagging look, like it was just threaded through the suspension with little respect to aesthetics. The last step is the dusting step. Here I'll paint each wheel with a small amount of dust-colored acrylic. Again, I like to do this by spinning the wheel with the airbrush while I apply the paint. I'll also spray some of the paint onto the base, including some of the suspension. Last, I'll use some on the body where the wheels would have kicked up dust. Once all this dries, I will apply one last coat of matte clear coat to seal everything in, and then put the car back together. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this Mad Max car, or as I like to call it, the Mini Monster Truck. I look forward to reading your comments below, what I did right, what I did wrong, and how you'd improve on it. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.